Even as adults, I think a lot of times what I'm, again, just being challenged on and refined, and even can like see this in so many facets of my life growing up and today, is being dysregulated. And so a lot of times when we have these emotions that feel really big and they're not coming out like at all how we expected them to, or it's a surprise, I don't know why I'm crying, or, I'm really mad. What's got me feeling so frustrated? It's this idea of dysregulation, so again, it's just common language that I think we can all use, but also it gives me empathy for someone else. I don't know. I think it helps us offer a little bit more grace and extend that, like, oh, okay, so I do see this behavior that's atypical, but it comes from a need not being met. Like, can I help you with that? Do you just need a minute? Like, I'm seeing it so much in this kind of micro scale at the school level, but also realizing, like, wow, how does this look when I interact with other people this way? And when people, kind of share that with me. And yeah, it just, I don't know. I think it's really impactful.
Hello and welcome. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and today I invite you to join me in revisiting a previously recorded conversation with Stephanie Higgs, in which we take a communication perspective on differentiation, dysregulation, and boundaries. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Stephanie Higgs. Stephanie is a passionate educator, and you're definitely going to hear that today. Since graduating with her master's degree in education, she has taught pre-K, second grade, and fourth grade, and she now works as a gifted educator and differentiation coach, where she supports both students and her fellow teachers. And after 13 years in education, Stephanie is expanding her reach by sharing resources, ideas, and advice for educators around the world on her Instagram page, which I'll link in the show notes. As we return to this conversation, which was originally published in 2 parts in February of 2023, I'm struck by how much has emerged as a result of this conversation. For a little additional context, Stephanie, who was really just starting her Instagram account at the time, reached out in late 2022 to ask about being a guest on the podcast. So after we exchanged some emails, that happened, and this conversation was the result. And then jumping forward to now, my relationship with Stephanie has continued since this conversation, and it's been really exciting to see how much she has made happen in the last year. She's created a huge community on Instagram sharing resources, and I know has spent this summer speaking at a bunch of conferences as well. But on top of that, she's also helped the CMM Institute to continue getting the word out about our free Cosmo activities, the social emotional resources we have. She uses them and has been a huge advocate for us. And then beyond that, and as a result of that, Stephanie and I have been collaborating this year to create the next turn in the Cosmo activities line, which will be for parents. And that's been really exciting. And I have truly been in awe of getting to work more closely with her this year. I'm just such a fan of Stephanie's, so I'm really glad to be able to share this conversation again. I don't think I need to say a lot more than that, so let's revisit this conversation with Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Abbie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited and I'm ready to jump right in. And I was thinking about how I wanted to introduce you, but truthfully, I know very little about you. This is our first time getting to talk face to face. And so I think rather than me trying to piece something together, I wondered how you would introduce yourself, especially knowing the direction that this conversation's going to go, that we're going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about storytelling, the social world you create in your classroom. What do you feel is important for people to know before we jump into this conversation?
Sure. So my name is Stephanie Higgs. I am 34 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I am an educator. So I have been in education since the moment I graduated college. I've known since I was in the fourth grade that I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher. So I had to make that stop along the journey. But I would say I'm just such a people person. I think every moment, every facet of my life is defined by the relationships that I have and the community that I've built. I've lived in multiple different cities and kind of have these friendships and relationships now, whether it's through work or through, social settings or through church or through just kind of childhood, and kind of maintaining and seeing those friendships that are now global. And, I think that's just a huge part of who I am. Is how energized I am by other people. Very much time alone, and I start to to wilt a little bit, and then I can be so exhausted and go into a setting with other people, and all of a sudden I'm back to life and just full of energy when moments before I was exhausted. So yeah, Enneagram 7. I joke that I'm an Enneagram 7 wing 7. I mean, just all people, all the time, high energy, quick thinker, lover of learning, lover of people. One of the fun things that I learned this through teaching and professional development, but it's kind of an activity called If You Really Knew Me, You Would Know. So it's a fun way to just get to know somebody. But I guess if you really knew me, you would know that I have been on a health and fitness journey for the last 6 months or so. So that started last August. I did 75 Hard, which is this really rigorous fitness challenge. I'm kind of coming off of that. I've joined a gym for the first time in my life. That has always been something I was so insecure about. If you really knew me, you would know that I some nights have 3 and 4 plans per night, and I'm really trying to slow that down. I think we all promised during COVID we would we would do better after, and here I am. And I guess one more, if you really knew me, you would know that I don't eat Thanksgiving food. I love deluxe macaroni and cheese and DiGiorno stuffed crust pizza, and that is my special. I only let myself have it at Thanksgiving. So just in case you needed to know that little tidbit as well.
That's a good one to know. That's unique. I wouldn't have been able to tell people about that if I was trying to introduce you.
And that I know how could that have not made it into my bio?
Has to. So I can see you're very passionate about the work that you do. How much do you identify with your role of, gifted educator or whatever, you would call yourself? And maybe what are some other roles that are important to who you are?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I am currently a gifted educator. I've been a pre-K, second grade, and fourth grade teacher previously. I kind of feel like the biggest things in my life have been gentle nudges that have just kind of found me. I never saw this coming. This was never what I saw as my next step. And now I can't imagine it any other way. And I think that this uses all of my strengths to the very best of my ability. But my brother was gifted growing up. And so I got to see that firsthand my whole life, kind of how that looked behind the scenes and kind of backstage. School can be a place where intellectually gifted students really thrive, and that's kind of their identity, and they feel really comfortable in that setting. But sometimes behind closed doors you see a different side of things. So I think that's kind of where that passion that landed, and I think having kind of that personal perspective on things has made it even more meaningful and has helped me connect with my students and kind of see not only some of the challenges that I know that they face just kind of growing and moving through school, but also some of the things I know just from my brother's experience of what that looked like. So I would say passionate educator is probably one of my primary roles right now. Obviously, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, a coworker. So a second piece of my role, I am an educator, but I'm also what's called an instructional coach, which when I was younger, I wasn't really aware of that role. So I'm not really sure how long those have been around, but it was because I'm so passionate about serving and loving on other teachers. So not only do I love the students so much, but I get so much energy from getting to share knowledge and ideas with other people. And so this role allows me to do both. It's a dual role. So I am a gifted educator for all the students in my building, but I'm also an instructional coach. So I get to work with teachers who need, it's called a differentiation coach. So when their students need something different, whether that's, hey, we're having this behavior that's come up and I would love to problem solve some ways we could handle that. Or it could be, hey, this student is struggling to catch on a little bit. Do you have any ideas from your classroom days? Or, wow, they're really flying through everything and I want to ensure that they're not bored. So that's really a gift as well, because it allows me, again, to serve students, but in a little bit more of an indirect way. It's really more partnering with their teachers. So I think no matter what role I have, whether that's a professional, whether it's in my personal life, relationships and connections are obviously just really important to me, that people feel safe with me, that I establish that trust and that great communication. I always joke that I'm a vault. So, I love to know all the gossip, love to know all the tea, but it stops with me. And so I think that having that relationship of trust with so many people just gives them kind of a safe person. We always joke sometimes we have to be each other's therapist, and I have no formal training in that. So it's really just me doing my best. But we have a good time. And I think that that's a huge important piece of that, is that trust.
A lot of people I've talked to on the podcast, when I kind of say, what's important to you, what matters to you, what, defines your life, a lot of people go to relationships. And that's where I would go to, because my relationships are so meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me to put myself in other people's shoes that don't seem to take their relationships as seriously, or maybe think about their relationships to the point that I think about mine. Like, I want to be intentional in the way that I'm showing up to the relationships. And so I imagine for you, it's not just a fluke that you've decided to do, whatever things to be someone who people can trust, to have good dialogue with people, or, whatever else you would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you say differentiation in your work, is that referring to like how you respond to students? That's like your way forward?
So differentiation is just a fancy word for different. These students need something different. So, we're kind of charged with grade level standards and expectations. And then differentiation means, how can we make that goal look different based on super individualized needs of our students? So whether that work needs to look different because, attention is a challenge. Can they demonstrate mastery to us in a shorter, more compact way? Because it can be hard for them to focus on an assignment of this length. Maybe it needs to look different because they need more movement. Maybe it's difficult or challenging for them to sit still for a while. So could we still demonstrate mastery with something that's a little bit more hands-on, or that has breaks built in? Those are ways that it could look different or differentiated. That could look like advanced work of, hey, here's kind of the grade level standard, but you walked in the door knowing that. So to help you kind of buy back some time, you already know how to do that. Let's go ahead and think about how we can move to the next level of depth there and layers in some challenge that would be more appropriate. So differentiation is all of those things, how the work looks different. What are the puzzle pieces that we can kind of take that grade level standard and expectation and then make it more individualized for each of the needs of our students.
How do you manage that with balancing, the individual needs? Because I imagine, however many students you have in your class, that's how many different learning styles they are. Everyone's a little different, and balancing all of that. Plus, I believe, you have maybe a strict, maybe it's more relaxed for you, but a curriculum of guidelines and standards you're supposed to follow. Those two things seem to be not like they could coexist very easily.
That's why I say that teachers are my superheroes. So
Yeah.
I'm no longer a classroom teacher. And by that, I mean, I don't have a full classroom bell to bell. So my day is broken up into segments of I'm instructing intellectually gifted students for 30 minutes at a time in different grade levels. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, 10 minutes, but, smaller chunks of time. And then interspersed throughout that day is also time for me to partner with those teachers, because you're right, that is so challenging. And they are experts sort of in that grade level content. But when we bring in the people, they've got the content, but when we meet the new students each year, once they get to know them, then they're able to say, hey, now that, I've gotten a little bit of time with these friends, I know that these couple of students are going to need something more advanced, or, and data is kind of what you were asking, kind of how do we do that? Data drives a lot of that. So we do things like pre-testing, where before they start a unit, they'll see kind of who knows what. So they know how much time to spend on the grade level curriculum, where we can kind of speed up a little bit. Oh, well, most of my students already knew that. So we don't, it calls for a week here, but I've got this data that would suggest that my students really already have a firm mastery there. So we can go a little bit deeper. We can take it a little bit quicker. But yeah, so it is, teaching is, it is a challenging job when you think every student in the class has different needs. And everybody's child is their world, so you've got this class full of, so many people's most precious, kind of prized person.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Right, exactly. And so meeting those really individualized needs, it is great that I get to serve teachers and students in that way. Not every school is as fortunate to have a position like mine where you serve those dual roles. And so being able to serve and love the teachers and students that I do makes me feel very, very thankful that it's just an extra set of hands. It's an extra brain. It's an extra, just person to kind of share those ideas with and help get things in place for students.
I imagine that would be a lot harder for individual teachers to do without the support of someone in a role like what you're in right now.
Absolutely. I have special training for that.
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience. And again, I don't have a class bell to bell. So that gives me that flexibility. Hey, do you want to try this? Would it help if I came in and helped you so that there was an extra set of hands if we're going to all try something on the computer for the first time? Or, oh, would it help you if let me go grab those copies and let me run that for you real quick? You obviously can't leave your students alone. Like even just that second set of hands sometimes, much less when they want to see something. I think so many of us are visual learners. Like we can conceptually talk about it, but I really need to see it. I need to see it in action with my students. You can tell me how it worked with yours, but I need to see it with mine. So again, having those relationships where they feel safe with me partnering with them in the classroom, that's something that brings us a lot of joy. And we really learn from each other, that it never feels like a threat or anything like that. It's very much a partnership. And so I think again, it goes back to that trust in the relationships to be able to work so well as a partnership and a team.
Do a lot of schools have a position like the one you're in, or is this pretty rare?
It is pretty rare. It's I feel like it's kind of forward thinking and innovative to have that. But I think there's, just a national teaching shortage as it is right now. And then even this position is really specialized. So again, I feel so fortunate to be, and again, it kind of found me. Like this was never what I saw coming, and it uses every gift I have. And so I feel so fortunate that, again, kind of those gentle nudges I've responded to along the way. And it took every single one to be where I am now. And I can't imagine myself anywhere else. I feel like it uses every gift and talent that I have in education. And right before, the person that did this job in the school where I was last teaching is the one who recommended this job for me. And, I had just kind of been saying, I don't know what's next. I feel it coming. I feel all these passions burning inside me. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to refine and kind of direct them in one way. I have this interest and this passion, and how do we kind of cohesively put those together? And, you kind of put out that vibe and that energy of I'm looking, I don't know what that looks like, and I'm open and I'm receptive. And it found me. So kind of tried to carry that same model into other parts of my life as well.
It's cool to hear you talk about your story that way, because one of the components of this, what I would call a communication perspective, which is just a lot of ways to approach your life. It's like putting on a different pair of glasses. You put on your sunglasses, you see differently. You put on the right prescription, you see differently, whatever. That's kind of my metaphor that makes sense in my head. But part of this communication perspective. So when I put on my communication glasses, part of it that we talk about is this idea of emergence, which sounds, really fancy, but really is just letting things emerge in the world. Is that, yes, we're actively creating things, and we can't always know what's going to emerge out of what we put out there. And so it feels like that is part of what defines your journey to where you are right now.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that word for it.
Yeah. So tell me more about what led you to be where you are right now.
So I think that it's one of those things when you kind of like track it backwards. I finally realized with this job, when it kind of fell into my lap, that I've actually never seen my next step in education coming. And then I kind of look back and I think, well, at what point, like, is it just in my career? Is it, kind of life as a whole? But again, I think when you're on this end of things and you start to look backwards, you can sort of see how, well, if that hadn't happened, then this hadn't happened. And so it's sort of fun to take that time, whether it's New Year's and you're kind of looking back on the year, or, kind of monumental birthdays and things like that, where you look back. But yeah, I think even, having my cousin went to the college that I ended up attending, and I went and visited her. And as soon as I stepped on that campus, I knew that's where I was going to college. I didn't even look or apply anywhere else. And that was in Chattanooga. And so I just knew that's where I was going to be. And so, I think it's just, I don't know. It's interesting to just see kind of how these things line up, and how, those things find you sometimes. So I went to school in Chattanooga and wasn't even sure kind of when I got there. I was still thinking teaching, but also hadn't been in a classroom as anything other than a student, so kind of getting back in a classroom on the other side of things and seeing if that was a good fit, and didn't see myself living in Chattanooga after school. I was only going to go there for school. And then, this thing happened and this thing happened and this thing happened. And all of a sudden it didn't make sense for me to move back. I graduated in 2010, which was during the recession, and there were not a ton of jobs at that time. And so I thought, well, I'll stay in school one more year and go ahead and get my master's. That will make me, more marketable and give me some more knowledge. I love learning. I'm in the habit. I've already been in school for 4 years. This would be a time it would make sense to get an additional degree. And so, never thought I was going to go right back to the hometown where I came from and teach at my elementary school. And, now we're almost 15 years in, that still hasn't happened. That's just kind of not the direction life has taken me. So,
right.
A million examples of that. But yeah, just kind of where one thing led to the next. And I was supposed to move out of my apartment, right when I was graduating college. But again, with the recession, and my parents hadn't gotten me a graduation gift, and it was graduation weekend. And they said, well, hey, what if we paid for your rent for the summer? We know that you're going back to grad school and kind of need to save up, but what if that was your graduation gift as we kind of pay that June and July rent? And so all of a sudden that's when a new job did pop open, because again, there wasn't anything in my hometown. There wasn't anything here. Kind of, where do I go? And a job in Chattanooga did pop open. And so, then I got my master's and I kind of got my foot in the door to school. And then that led to a teaching position the next year in a full-time role. And so, yeah, so it's just kind of, I think there's so many things in life that we look back on, and that one step and that one yes led to, the next 5 steps. So,
right.
Yeah, that's kind of sweet to reflect back on that.
Yeah. Earlier you had said, it was 4th grade when you first, realized you maybe wanted to be a teacher. What specifically happened in 4th grade that made you want to be a teacher? Do you remember that?
I think I always had an obsession. Like, I even remember my 1st grade teacher every single morning when she would come in, she would take her little quilted purse with a gold chain strap and put it in the top of her little cabinet. And I just watched her like a hawk. And I made my mom take me all over town to try to find that exact outfit of the sweater tucked into the plaid skirt and, just the whole 90s teacher vibe. But I think I just always was just fascinated with teachers as people. And I think always seeking that connection. We joke sometimes, like when our students see us, out in the wild, they don't, it's like, wait, you don't live at the school? Like, it's so weird. Contextually, I don't picture you at Walmart or, whatever. But I think I always wanted to know more about my teachers just as humans and as people, and, loved their outfits and, things that were way outside of just kind of a day in the life of, a 1st grade student and what we were learning. And so, yeah, I think that's always been important to me, just kind of knowing who they were as people and just like loving their personalities and wanting to get to know them better. And I think I always felt such a connection with them. And I think as someone who loves learning, and even as silly as like loving school supplies, I mean, I just feel like the whole school package is just for me. So, yeah, I've been that way my whole life, of every August getting so excited for, new pencils and just new crayons and, new notebooks and starting all over. So yeah, I think it's been there all along. And I think it's, obviously when I was a kid, it wasn't necessarily a love for kids, which, a lot of adult teachers would say, but at that time I was one. But yeah, I think it was just the school setting. Like, I think there's so much hope and there's so much potential there, and there's just so much learning happening every day. And it's always been a really magical place for me, and I've literally never left it. I was in it until I was 18, went to college, and then went right back to it. So since I was 5 years old, this has been a huge part of who I am.
Has there ever been a moment where you thought maybe you'd go a different direction?
It's funny. Sometimes I think I know myself so well, and I will just really like drum up a thought or an idea, and I will like pitch it to a couple of friends, and they will shoot it down so quickly. And so there was a time, I think, everybody goes through this of, I was a few years into teaching and starting to think like, I've just really been doing some thinking, and I think that every strength that I possess, like, is perfect for teaching. And I don't think I would be successful anywhere else. And immediately they were like, no, the qualities that make you a good teacher might also make you, and kind of like brainstorming some other ideas. So it's just funny because I think sometimes I just go off on this like deep thought, process. And I really had come around to like, nope, this is it. This is the only job that I would be this successful at. Like, I love it. It uses all my strengths, and this is it. And they were like, yeah, no, but you have these strengths too that would be good in this field, or, whatever. But yeah, for me, there's just never been any other option. It was always teaching and education in some capacity, whether that's higher ed, elementary school. Just, I love learning.
I guess this is just kind of a slightly different way to ask the question I've already asked about, what's it like for you to reflect back and look at your path, but just asking you about what was your path, but in story version, because I'm curious about the stories that were told on like a personal level and on a society level about what we're capable of, about, so many different things. So I'm curious if you have in your mind memories of significant stories growing up or even more recently in your life that you feel like shaped your path into education.
I think story in and of itself is just, it's such a powerful tool. Like, when you think back to, before you can even read, I feel like that's kind of the way. And even in a time, in the world when there wasn't a written and recorded language, like, stories were how knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. So I think that stories just hold such an important component in everyone's history, whether that's literally the history of the world or whether that's each of our individual personal histories. But yeah, I think even when you're so little and you don't even know how to read, and maybe that's a parent parent sharing a story with you before bed. Maybe that's a teacher, reading you a story or telling you a story. But I think I've just always had this huge imagination and been a really big dreamer. And so I think sometimes that that has been a challenge for me when reality doesn't always intersect with kind of this, this dream state or this story land.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think I've found a few of those things out the hard way. I'm like, I grew up listening to all these stories and they went this way, but then they ended. It was kind of the happily ever after and then it ends. But what if you're sitting in a period of time where it doesn't feel like there is going to be a happy ending or resolution at all? What does that look like? So yeah, I think that stories shape all of us. I think when we're really little, sometimes those can be a great form of escape. Those can be a way that they kind of transport us out of our kind of lived experience day in and day out, whether that's transporting us to another imagined land or imagined world. But I also think they've always helped me form connections with the storyteller. And so whether I was experiencing different types of stories, I think that has been a really exciting experience for me. It's just the engagement with other storytellers, and I think finding that communication, because I think stories are a real way to connect people. And so I think that's been kind of pivotal to me too. And then the older I get, realizing that we're all living one, and that everyone has a story to share. So I think, I think with so many things in life, when we're younger, it's more about that information being fed to us, and as you get older, you kind of flip that script and you're like, but wait, you've shared all these stories, or you've read me all these stories, or you've told me all these stories, but like, what are your stories, and I think sometimes when we're young, life is more focused on on us, on ourselves. But then as we get older, kind of realizing like, but like you asked me about my day, but how was your day? And, kind of that reciprocity there, in kind of hearing and valuing other people's stories rather than just that chance to share. It was not until I was in college that a friend of mine, was kind of sharing the idea of seeking to understand before you seek to be understood, and kind of that value there of kind of hearing first, and listening first before, kind of needing to be the one talking and sharing, which, you've known me for a few minutes and I bet you can already tell that was a challenge for me. Wow.
No, that's good. That's good.
Like to hit that mute button or that pause button and be more of an active listener rather than so quick to share and be more of a learner and student of others, and more curious about them and their stories as well.
I relate to that. The podcast has been a great exercise in learning to be a listener, because I'm imagine me like you is that I have a genuine interest in other people. It's not that I don't care what other people have to say. Totally. I just get really excited to say what I have to say. And so I'm like, this is great. Everyone wants to hear this. I have to say this right now. And there's good in that. And there is also good in learning to not say what you were going to say, because it doesn't always need to be said.
Sure. Yeah.
But I like what you're saying, that it is, the way I see it is that whether you realize it or not, or you would call it that or not, everybody is living stories, and everything you could, talk about in terms of stories. And I know we'll talk, towards the end of our conversation about using this language of a better social world and, what's your kind of vision for that. But as we're talking about stories, I'm curious if you have a story that you're hoping to leave with the students that you work with, or even the other educators that you work with. What's the story that you're hoping to create or pass on for them?
A great question. I think it would be just sort of some of the life lessons that I've learned. Of course, I think we all sometimes, once we have a lived experience, we want to kind of save someone else from that same thing. And so I think just some of the lessons I've learned, and just kind of how to treat other people and how to invest better in other people, how to care for others well, even if it's kind of dying to some of my own needs, or, what I would prioritize. Listening and reading others better, I think, has been really important as well. And so even like I was just kind of mentioning, like even teaching my students kind of what reciprocal conversations look like at such a young age, hey, I've just asked you guys about your winter break. Okay, so let's think about the reciprocity there. So instead of me saying, okay, let's move right into the lesson, kind of what would be that natural next step? Oh, we can ask you about your break. What did you do? And for some kids that comes really naturally, but for a lot of them, it's just, we're kind of leading the charge, and they're kind of there for that. So I think teaching them that they kind of as kids are still storytellers and story makers, and they are living a story, and that they can kind of press pause, and that it can be more reciprocal than just this like teacher directed or adult directed universe that that they're part of for some of these early years in life. But yeah, I think I always just think about too, like, what is my I guess like legacy, or, if I move on, whether that's I move cities or I, move jobs, or what is that, what will people look back and say? How will I be remembered, in a year or in 5 years if I, have moved on, and thinking back in life previously, like what would people that worked with me 5 years ago say? And it's funny, I do joke, I have to go back to the teachers that I taught with when I was fresh out of college and 22 and thought I knew every little single thing there was to know. And going back to them and saying, wow, like you guys were really gracious with me because you knew how much I cared. You knew the passion that I had and how much I loved it. But like, I also I hadn't seen a lot of the world at 22, and I didn't have a family like some of them did. So I wasn't always as gracious of, I wonder why that's not done. You have 3 kids and 2 of them have been sick, but I got my part done. Right. Well, I'm 22 and I'm single. So I could see maybe why I had a little bit of, extra time. And so I think at 34, looking back and saying, did I serve them well then? Did I use my singleness well? Did I use that to serve other people and say, hey, I have time to spare. Like, what can I take off of you? I know you have 2 sick kids out of 3 and probably exhausted. What can I do to like lighten that burden? And so I think some of those are just the stories of just experiences lived, experiences learned, and how those could impact someone else in a positive way. And, the wrong turns or turns that were later redeemed, how could I share that experience with others and have a positive impact on them and their daily interactions with themselves, with each other, self-talk and all kinds of things. So yeah, I think just leaving a positive, lasting legacy and kind of connecting with them in a way that those stories do stick. When I say, let me tell you about a time where that happened to me and kind of what I learned from that or what I experienced, and letting that kind of shape or move them forward in a more positive way.
Okay, you've made me think about a lot of things with all the wonderful things you just said. So let's see if I can remember them as I work my way through them. But when you're talking about the kids and yes, your story makers, yes, your storytellers, the word that is not really a word that I want to add to that and invent is like story hearer or something to that effect, because in so many ways, the person that's receiving the story is just as important as the person that's telling the story, because it's so much about the space that you create in any relationship, whether it's, your peers or you to your students is, do they feel heard? Do they feel safe to share the story in the first place? And teaching them not only to be storytellers, but to be story hearers and good stewards of other people's stories.
That's so important.
Yeah, that's something I feel like is an unseen kind of side of when we talk about communication. It's not just the person doing the direct verbal communicating. It's everything else that's going on too.
Sure.
And I think like you with your students, me and my podcast is that I am very specific and careful not to say that this is an interview, but a conversation, because that's how real human interaction happens. It's very rarely in your day where it's just one person asking questions, one person answering. It's a dialogue. And so I feel like that's a little bit what you're teaching with your students. It's not you interviewing them about how their holiday was, but getting to build the relationship through that actual back and forth reciprocity of the conversation.
And just teaching them that's just another way to show that you care, and how surprised would, parent be when they pick you up at, this afternoon from school and they ask how your day was. And then you say, fine, and, get on a device and are kind of checked out. But if you said, Mom, I remember you saying you had an important meeting at work. Like, how did that meeting go? And mom's going to be like, what? Like, that's so thoughtful. Thank you. That just asking questions of other people makes us feel really cared for and, just makes us feel valued and heard and thought of. And I think that's so important.
And I imagine like in a school setting, in any setting, there's a million things that people are so careful about teaching their kids. But maybe not everybody's going out of their way to realize that they should teach their kids how to be the story hearers or whatever other word you would use for that.
Yeah. And that's really important work. Yeah. That's a good challenge for me to think about too, of am I doing that well? Am I modeling that well when they share with me? And also then am I teaching that, in turn?
I have people in my life that do that really well, that are really, really good story hearers to me and to other people I know. And I appreciate that space so much. And so I want to put myself in the shoes to say, well, I know what it means to me when someone listens to me in that way. How can I flip that around and offer that back to other people?
Yeah, that's great. And it makes me think too, something I've learned later in life is I have this rule that if I say it behind your back, I need to say it to your face. And I
Mm-hmm.
say that jokingly, but I actually mean compliments because I,
Not where I thought you were going.
yeah, and that's not ever where anyone thinks I'm going. But how often do we say these kind things about our friends and it never makes its way back to them? And so that has become a real rule of mine of, we just stood here and had this 5-minute conversation about our technology guy and how if we didn't have him, I mean, what would we do? And he saves the day. And if I have the meeting in 10 minutes and I tell him how urgent it is, he gets here and he makes magic happen. And he just works so hard for us. And well, we just had that 5-minute conversation, but does that benefit him at all? Like, no, we think he's so wonderful, but does he know that? And so, the next time I saw him saying, hey, we were having this whole conversation and I just wanted you to know, like, you deeply and profoundly impact the work that we do every day. And so as you were saying that, I was thinking of a friend who's a really good story hearer. And she's one of those that loves and encourages others so well and real gently and from behind the scenes. And so how does that benefit her? If I'm sitting here thinking of her, I need to be really intentional to say, hey, I was having this conversation about people who are great at this. And this is such a strength of yours. And so I just wanted you to know that. Like, I just wanted you to know that I thought of you when I was thinking of this wonderful quality that we were talking about, that it's lucky if we know somebody like that who's a good hearer.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's kind of been a goal of mine too, is just to really be mindful of my affirmations and to just never withhold kindness. Like if I've thought it and I've said it to someone else, being sure that that makes its way back to that person.
Yeah, I think that's great, especially for those like quieter or less visible qualities that when you really look at them, you see how important they are and how much you appreciate them. But to say, hey, I see you doing this. I notice it. It matters that you're doing that for me and for other people. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to go back to a little bit of what you were saying moments ago about being able to pass on your wisdom and sharing your stories of your own experiences. And I imagine that the stories that we share of times that we learned things are maybe not the stories where we looked the best or got it right. We have to learn. And so like emergence, like I've already talked about, another quality is mystery and kind of leaving room for mystery. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious if, off the top of your head, there's anything that you're still trying to learn or find peace in the not knowing. What's the mystery in your life right now? What's something like you're unsure of, maybe is another way to put it.
Gosh, I just love these questions and I can't wait to transfer them and ask them to like all of my friends and everyone I know because they're so good and they're so deep and they're so thoughtful. Yeah. So I love a cheesy Pinterest quote. And there's one that I've seen a million times, but it's, there's years in life that ask questions and there's years that answer. And so, I love, for me, New Year's Eve is actually not quite as pivotal of a moment for me. So my birthday is in late July and then we always start school about 2 weeks later. And so I turn a new age, I start a new school year. And again, I've been in school since I was 5 years old. And so for me, that's kind of my new year, is that couple of weeks.
Always has been.
Yeah, it literally always has been. I turn a new age, I start a new school year. My calendar is really just not January to January. Like I think in school years, I mean, it's a semester and, last school year. So
of course,
when I think through that, I kind of think about in school year terms, again, I'm not calendar year like the rest of the world, but thinking about, the years that I've had that have asked questions and the years that have answered. And I think the older I get, the more comfortable I am sitting in the years that ask questions where I don't have resolution. I don't have an answer. I don't know what's next. And I feel that I'm kind of in those stages now and I don't know what that means or what that looks like. And so I think, again, just, I've gotten a little bit older. I'm getting more established in this role that I have now, but I really have developed and refined my leadership skills a lot in the last 2 years. And so, having conversations with people that I really value is something that I do when I have these years that are asking questions of, what do you see? What do you think? These are the things I'm starting to kind of wonder about. And so I think just kind of wondering right now what to do with that leadership energy and where to put that and where to serve others. Does that look like, I've gotten involved this year in, I volunteer on the executive board for our gifted statewide committee. And so I'm kind of having a chance to serve teachers more globally. I'm the secretary, so I create like a monthly newsletter. And so that's something I share with all the gifted teachers that are part of our organization in the whole state. And I share that monthly. Well, that led to, I've started this Instagram, which is how you and I connected and found each other. And I started that in December, and it's mid-January, and it has grown, I don't know what's typical or what's normal, but it's grown faster than I would have expected, because again, I never saw that coming. I never saw me being shared in kind of a vulnerable capacity with strangers. Like, I love what I do, but that's always been like a real relationship thing to me, of when I'm connected with you, to kind of just put it out into the world and hope people like it and use it, and that it's helpful, is very new and very scary to me. So I think there's a lot of mystery right now in my life as far as what am I going to do next? Like, I still, I'm kind of what you would consider like a mid-career teacher. And I know I'm talking about teaching a lot, but it is, I think for me, I'm kind of in that sweet spot. I'm in the 4th year in my current position, which is kind of, it was brand new, kind of learned my way through it, have kind of moved on to perfecting some of the areas where I still wanted to grow. And now it's that question mark of what's next. Do I stay here and do I dig in? Or does that start to look like I really need to find ways to continue to grow myself and challenge myself in leadership? Well, if that's not going to be in my job, where are places in my personal life where I could dig in and provide additional leadership, where I could volunteer my time, where I could serve in the community? And so, so I think those are some of the questions that are in my head right now, but it is very hard for me to make changes, and it is hard for me to not know what's next. This is also an interesting kind of fork in the road too, because I've never been this happy in my current job. When I was saying earlier, before this job kind of found me, I was really restless and I was really ready for next steps. And I was almost speaking it into existence of, it's going to happen. It needs to happen. I don't know what it is. And now I'm saying, I quite possibly think this is the best job I will ever have in my entire life in education. I want to hold it so tightly. And so, but at the same time, feeling kind of that charge and that pull and that leadership of what could those next steps be. And so I think just kind of deciding where to put that energy and that leadership and that service, whether that's in my current position, whether that's exploring a different way to lead and serve. Maximum impact is always kind of a huge goal for me. And so maximum impact on student success, like specifically. And so every time I make these moves, I become more global and more universal. And so it was, I'm a classroom teacher. So I am with these kids all day, every day. We spend so much time together, more than I spend with my family, and probably them too during the school year. And so moving from impacting those kids directly to a position like the one I have now, where I'm more global and I'm working with not only all of the students kind of throughout the building, but all of the teachers throughout the building. Well, now I've moved into this social media world where I'm sharing ideas with teachers all across the world. And so it kind of breaks down where your followers are from. Australia actually is my second largest area behind the United States. And so thinking, oh my goodness, like this is an impact across the globe. And so I think becoming more comfortable with the mystery and the question mark that we literally never know, and we can never predict what's coming next. My mom has some health challenges. And so I have spent a lot of time the last few years navigating that. She has Parkinson's, and that was part of why I relocated to Middle Tennessee. And I think when she was first diagnosed, it was so new to me. We didn't know anyone who had Parkinson's. It was just brand new. And I think in my head, so naively at the time, I thought, well, I guess at some point everyone's is going to experience some kind of challenge or struggle. And okay, we know what hers is, and, we're going to move forward. And well, it's shaking. And so that's going to make some things really challenging. But, when I think of all these different challenges that could come our way, I guess this feels more manageable. And that was very naive of me. Parkinson's affects literally every single part of you every single day. And so it is so much bigger and deeper and wider and more painful than just shaking. And so that's the tip of the iceberg. And so for me, thinking, I don't know what that looks like. And I'm scared to ask that question. I'm scared to know. And so I think sometimes that's why we, can and should embrace that mystery, is sometimes we don't need to know. So, I don't think we have the capacity or are built, to know so much so soon. I think it comes in these bite-sized pieces that are a little bit more manageable. So I think just kind of embracing the certainty and appreciating the time that I have here, that she's as healthy as she is today. We don't know what that looks like, and so, but she's here and she's, she's trying, and things already look so different than they did just a few years ago, but not letting myself go too far down that road and just saying, you know what, but she's here right now. And she, we had a great phone call, or we got to hang out and spend time together. So I think being more comfortable in the question mark, more comfortable in the years that are asking questions rather than providing answers, and just kind of embracing that mystery. Yeah,
well, I'm right there with you on the quotes. I love a good quote when I have such a reaction when I see words that describe an experience that I maybe didn't have those words for it before.
Yep.
And so it's a real aha, a revelation. It feels really powerful to me to have the right language to talk about things. Like how I always talk about me studying communication in my undergrad is that it's not like I was really being told about something new. It was that I already knew all of these things. I'd experienced so much of what we talk about in all my relationships, in the ways that I was communicating, and the breakdowns in communication I was already experiencing. It was like I already knew all of these things to be true. I just didn't have the language to understand that, yeah, that happens to everybody. And this is exactly how people relate to each other. And here's the path that a lot of relationships take to develop. So that's why that looks like that. And so I find it really helpful.
Well, and I think it just goes back to kind of the overarching theme of our conversation is it makes you feel more known, and it makes you feel like, wait, I'm not alone.
Yes.
I'm not the only one who's ever felt that way. Like it just makes you feel understood. And I think underneath the heart of what you and I are talking about and really kind of your vision here with these types of conversations is to make us feel connected, to make us feel more known, to make us feel more understood, and to challenge us to like go out into our worlds and do more of that, to value each other's stories, to value the people that tell them and the people that hear them and the people that hold them for us. You know, like it's hard. You know, I'll talk to anybody about anything, but I'm actually really private about my mom's health. Like it's very sacred, and almost nothing is sacred to me. I will tell you the silliest, most embarrassing, you know, I'll do that all day long. I'll be vulnerable. I'll be honest, but like, that's something I hold really private and sacred. But the people that I've entrusted, you know, to kind of help me hold and carry and listen to that story a little bit, really lighten the burden for me, you know, and make me feel understood. And so, you know, and I don't know, I think that's just the heart of this is, you know, whether it's the silly quote on Pinterest or whatever, but it's like, oh, that makes me feel understood. That's what I'm trying to like grasp those words. And they said it so beautifully, and I'm not the only one. And, you know, so.
You get it, Stephanie. You get it.
I know, Abbie. I'm like, how did we not know each other sooner? Oh my gosh.
I know. Okay, where this is making me go then is to talk a little bit more about language.
Okay.
I, in one of my earlier conversations, was able to talk to some other teachers, and I got connected with them because the CMM Institute actually has kind of a program, game/activity called Cosmo Kids, where they're trying to bring some of these ideas of this theory that, you know, for so long has only existed in the world of academia to say, how can we actually bring this to people? And what if, you know, we start young and the next generation of leaders already has all of these skills around empathy and making meaning and so many different areas. You know, what can the world look like if from a young age people get to learn about this kind of thing? Anyway, what they would talk about in our conversation was how important it was for them to have shared language in the classroom or common language to be able to create like shared meaning. And so I wonder how you see that in your classroom, if that's something you think about creating for your students or how you see it happen.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And actually, I was just talking with a company that provides some social emotional supports and strategies and curriculum, because I was looking at it from kind of that next level up of not even just with students, but in all of us that interact with kiddos, and making sure that we all have and share common language. And so, for example, a skill that I have recently been digging into with some students is the idea of being open-minded. And there's a few kind of keywords and phrases that I got from this curriculum that I'm going through, and they have been so profound. And it's just so funny with kids. As long as I've been teaching, I've noticed this, but there are certain things that you just say it in just this certain way, and kids just get it. Like, you don't have to explain it further. You don't have to expound on it. And so very first year when I was getting my master's and I was a pre-K assistant, the music teacher used the phrase, I only listen to quiet hands. And that's it. Like, and every kid, I mean, I've been teaching now, you know, almost 15 years, and I still use that. I took that from her, and they just get it. And so they understand that, you know, when we're blurting and we're doing all of this, like, oh, she needs that quiet hand. She values that. And that gives us all a safe space to share and be heard. And, you know, she values that. And so It's just funny that kids really can like pick up and grasp that, but also, the language that we use, it is great if that looks consistent with all the people that a student is interacting with as they're trying to make
Yeah.
meaning and as they're trying to learn, how to form better connections and, kind of where that can grow. And it's funny because I've even realized like as an adult, I've been challenged by going through this curriculum of, are there places that I respond in a more closed-minded way because we're going through this open versus closed-minded. And so kind of thinking, what does that look like when I hear somebody say something and I immediately have such a closed mind? And also how often I'm proven wrong with that because I do go in and say, oh, no, that's not, again, I don't love change. That's not really what I was envisioning. Like, I'm not super comfortable with that. Oh, wait, but, and like now going back and saying, I've told you over and over how many times I've never seen my next step coming. And if I go in with, no, that wasn't really on the card. Like that's not where I thought we were headed. Kind of what does that look like to have a more open-minded approach? And so I think that consistency of language is really important because I think sometimes we can all, even as adults, we can catch on to these like bite-sized words or phrases. Like you and I were saying, we love a quote, but like those stick with me because of the way that they are worded and they get rid of a lot of the extra and the fluff. And it's like just this little bite-sized phrase that I can remember and that it can stick with me. And times where I'm feeling anxious or stressed or, whatever. And I can go back to these quotes, even if I'm not sitting there reading it. And I think it's the same when we have this common language to speak with our kids, whether we're kind of self-regulating, like even as adults, I think a lot of times what I'm, again, just being challenged on and refined and even can like see this in so many facets of my life growing up and today is, being dysregulated. And so a lot of times when we have these emotions that feel really big and they're not coming out like at all how we expected them to, or it's a surprise. I don't know why I'm crying or, I'm really mad. What's got me feeling so frustrated? It's this idea of dysregulation, so again, it's just common language that I think we can all use, but also it gives me empathy for someone else when I can say, are you feeling dysregulated right now?
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm so tired, but I feel like that feels less attacking than saying like, because of course, if your mom's like, are you tired? And you're like, no, I'm not having this reaction because I'm just tired. I'm really not. Oh, the next morning I had a good night's sleep and all of a sudden I can process and deal with this appropriately. But
that's a moment where you're like, I don't actually want to be seen right now.
Yes, exactly.
Don't see me. Don't see me.
Right. No, don't. And don't know me that well. Because it's not that I'm tired. This really does matter as much as I think it does in this moment. Not actually justified and appropriate. But I think that common language with all of us, whether it is like I'm seeing it so much in this kind of micro scale at the school level, but also realizing like, wow, how does this look when I interact with other people this way? And when people, kind of share that with me. And it just, I don't know, I think it's really impactful to have kind of those words and those phrases that we can latch on to that don't feel so personal, like it just, it doesn't feel personal to say like, are you dysregulated? Yes. And here's why. It's that I'm tired. It's that I'm starving and I'm hangry or, all of these different things.
Because you're kind of asking, like, are you experiencing this thing that every single person experiences?
Right. And like,
it's not, there's like no judgment in it. It's so like a neutral statement of like, it's so clear. Like, I'm just looking to understand you when I say, are you feeling dysregulated right now?
Right. And of course, now I don't have this one off the tip of my tongue. I'll have to email it to you. But I saw a quote on Instagram about like dysregulation. And it gave me so much grace for my mom 20 and 30 years ago, because it was basically saying like parents, when we are kind of losing our tempers with kids, like it's that your needs aren't being met. And so again, like you were saying, it's not personal at all. And it's not an attack. It's like, if you're dysregulated, you have a need that's not being met, and it might cause you to be acting out in this behavior or this way. But again, it goes back to like, you have a need that's not being met. So I even think growing up, if there came a point when my mom was just so frustrated with my brother and I, and it was summer and we had just been home for 6 weeks straight and like she just needed a minute, she was dysregulated because her needs weren't being met. She was exhausted. We had been there for 6 straight weeks and she hadn't had a moment's peace. And, and so I don't know. I think it helps us offer a little bit more grace and extend that like, oh, okay, so I do see this behavior that's atypical, but it comes from a need not being met. Like, can I help you with that? Do you just need a minute? Like, and also it's not personal towards me that, that you are feeling frustrated or that you're, maybe lashing out in a way that I don't typically experience from you, but it's that you're dysregulated. So like you have a need that's not being met, and that kind of shifts that.
Well, even like, 20, 30 years ago, if someone said to your mom, are you feeling dysregulated? She'd probably be like, what in the world is that? What are you talking about? Probably only the psychologists were, using that language. Sure. And so it's cool that, as much as it would be great if we had all that language back then, we're always learning, we're always finding new ways to talk about things. And so that even having that language now can help you go back and like heal some of those things, to look back and reflect through your lens you now have of all of this great language.
Yeah.
And to, heal is the word I have for that right now.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest reasons I was so excited to get to talk to you is because I am always talking about social worlds on this podcast. And I feel like that can be a kind of like abstract thing to try to understand or reframe like how you view your life in terms of social worlds, of your family's a social world. And then, you have a social world at work, and then your friends and your nation, we're a million different social worlds we exist in. But I feel like you can kind of help guide us through thinking more practically about what a social world can look like and how we can influence it, because you're kind of like a little case study, like an example for us of, let's talk about your classroom. I know you don't have, students, you said like every day, but looking back at when you did have a classroom, or what you do when you do have students now, looking at that as a social world and saying, or getting to hear from you, how do you go about creating the social world that the students need and that works for you too? Because like you were saying earlier, you kind of have to do that for sure every year that you're getting new students. And probably I would go as far to say as every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Gosh, I have so many ideas on this one. Okay, so this is super important to me because I think the longer that I've been teaching, the more I've let go of the reins a little bit, because I think when I first started teaching, academics and instruction was so important that in my head, it was almost like, I love you so much that I actually don't have time to listen to the story about the dog because I have got to teach you this stuff. And because I love you so much, I like want to teach you every single thing I possibly can in this amount of time. And so I don't have time for that story about the dog, but like, I really need you to know, the standard that I'm trying to teach. And again, that's because I love you so much. And I really want to make sure you know this. And so that was kind of my first, few years in education. That was really kind of my priority. So then I moved, and the school where I taught, relationships were like number one. And so that it's like, well, of course, that's how I feel in my personal life. Like I value them so much, but at school, that hasn't been maybe my top priority because I have so much to teach you. And that's how I'm showing you that I love you, is I'm teaching you so much. And so that kind of flipped it on its head for me a little bit to think about. We actually looked at some research. I wish I could quote who it was from, but this was several years ago. But the idea that students actually you need to know 10 things about your students before you try to teach them. Like they need to have enough of a connection with you that like it's not they walk in day one and you start teaching. And so I have never forgotten that. And I thought, like at any given time, could I tell you 10 things about these students? And I would be challenged by that. When a parent would come in and say, oh, I'm sure they told you, we have this major thing going on. And I would have this kind of smile of, now that you mention it, they were trying, but I was dealing with this other, 3 things in the classroom, and I did not get that my full attention. And that is so huge to your family. And like, looking back, I should have stopped everything. I should have paused, or I should have said, I can't at this very moment, but please come back to me at this time, or I'll come find you. Let's be sure we check in about that. And so I think that truly that rule of you need to know 10 things before you teach them. Like you need that connection first and foremost before anything else, realizing that is going to drive that every student does need something different, which we were talking about kind of on the academic end earlier, but it's also important in the social sense. Like some of your students are introverted and some of them are extroverted. And I've had conversations with parents before of, we're just really wanting them to find their people. And sometimes that is a very justified concern, and we'll puzzle through that together. But we've also had students that I would say, you know what? Do you think that your child is energized by being with other people, or more by being alone? And every time they'd say, oh, for sure, being alone, like that they totally recharge by themselves. And I would say, okay, so let's think about the school day and how taxing that would be for a child of this very small age. And you're telling me they re-energize and they recharge by being alone, and they are in the most social setting, every minute of the day. And so at recess, if they're kind of taking a lap and kind of doing their own thing, is this problematic, and is this cause for concern? Do we need to step in? Do we need to provide some support? Sometimes the answer is absolutely yes. They don't have the skills. They're not equipped with, hey, how do I join a game? Or I tried and they wouldn't let me. Like, what do I do now? How do I navigate that? The playground was very traumatic for me. I understand that is, because it's a whole social world in and of itself. And so,
yep.
So sometimes it's that, but for some of these kids, that's their time to recharge. Like they have pushed all day long and interacted and answered the questions and done the partner work that they really didn't want to do. And, they've gotten through all these pieces, but at some point they do need that moment to kind of recharge to get through the next portion of our really social school day. So I think knowing your kids and knowing kind of how they recharge. Same thing. A lot of times I'll give choice with partner or individual work, because as an adult, I think we used to always say, well, they're going to have to at some point. We all have to collaborate with other people. We all have to work for somebody. Everybody's got a boss, and there are these pieces, but there are also like so many jobs that are remote where you really can kind of plug in and do your thing. So again, it's not that you never are going to have to work with somebody, and I would be ill-equipping them if I didn't ever, expose them to working with, mixed ability groups or peers of different kind of backgrounds and things like that. But at the same time, some of us are more productive and kind of think better kind of on a more solo track, where I am obviously very extroverted. I'm a huge external processor. If you make me work kind of in, we sit our desk in these rows and columns and I can't move and I can't talk, that's not going to be my best work because I am such a verbal external processor. So I think really just knowing your kids, I think coming out of COVID, social emotional supports are more important than ever. I think we missed a lot. I know every state, kind of responded differently. We were closed for the fourth quarter of a school year, which is a hugely significant, period of time. And then when we did come back, there were so many restrictions in place. And so, our desks were really far apart and we were behind masks and, just things like reading facial expressions. And we lost some of that in some really pivotal years. So providing the appropriate social emotional supports now to kind of backtrack and make sure that these kids are still connecting, as strongly as they would want to, and especially kind of making up for some of that time. I think it's also really important to model myself, but also be really open to like feedback and learning. So I always kind of talk about the 3 C's, like based on any experience or conversation I have, the 3 C's, like was what I thought, was it confirmed? Was it challenged or was it changed? I got that from a curriculum called Nonfiction Notice and Note. But basically, when you're reading nonfiction text, like, does that kind of go with what I already knew? Is that challenging or is it changing my thinking? But you can apply that to any area of life. So I think being like more responsive myself to like feedback, to learning, to growing, to improving and kind of modeling that for others. Like, what does that look like when someone tells me like, hey, this is an area where you could improve, or hey, have you ever thought about, trying it this way? So I think all those are really important to communication, that like conflict and, not even conflict, but conversations, it's not always just like super positive. Like there are hard conversations. So how do we offer support there? And then some of the specific strategies that I use, one of those is morning meetings. So there's this company called Responsive Classroom, and they put out morning meetings. And when I first heard that word, I was like, oh yeah. I think we did that in elementary school. We'd like look at the calendar, or maybe like count some sticks or straws or so. Yeah, I think I got morning meeting. Well, that's not what it looks like at all in 2023. So Responsive Classroom has some great resources there, but basically morning meeting has 4 parts and it's all just really systematic and really thoughtful. But the first one is a greeting. So every student gets greeted every day. And how small does that sound? Like, of course, but how often are, you're kind of back at your desk, kind of getting some things ready for the day, and they're walking right in and like, no one says hi. No one says, I'm glad you're here. And, again, even as an adult, when we kind of flip that script, because everything we do in this micro level, like this is all stuff that we experience as adults. How welcome and included do I feel when I walk into a social space and no one acknowledges that, and no one looks at me and no one makes me feel welcome? How uncomfortable and out of place do I feel? So making sure that every student gets greeted every day, but you do it in really fun ways. So there's all sorts of different ones. So there's like a 1-minute greeting. So like we'll set a timer for a minute. You're going to go greet like as quickly as you can. Their favorite is one called shoe salad. So everyone puts a shoe in the middle and we make a shoe salad, and then you draw out a shoe, and that's the student that you go and greet. So it's very targeted for kids, like these fun ways, kind of gamify it a little bit. And then after that, there's always a share. And so that share could be something like, what's the news? So like, and kind of teaching them news is a lot of times it's positive. Yeah, maybe you did something great this weekend or something fun happened, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, hey, like I'm kind of struggling with this at home. And so if you see me a little sad, like, just know this is why, like this is going on. I don't really want to talk about it. So I've told you, you're aware, and I just kind of need a little space today. But getting that time not only to be greeted and welcomed into their learning environment every day, but to share with others. And then there's always an activity, which is their favorite part. And that is more just a game. There's always so much community building, that can happen there. And kind of learning some, again, great social emotional skills as far as, is it a winning losing game? Are we playing on teams and working cooperatively? And then always ending that with what is called a morning message. So that's where the teacher kind of lays out and communicates the day. For again, we talk a lot about neurodiversity. So that's kind of when our students think and kind of have brains that are wired in different ways. There's kind of neurotypical, and then there are different ways that our thinkers can be more diverse or more different. And so a morning message can be really great for students who need a little bit of predictable, schedule. If there's a schedule change, let's go ahead and kind of identify that first thing this morning. Hey, we're going to have to flip, lunch and recess today. And, we had a field trip, so our afternoon's going to be a little off and, things like that. So those 4 parts of a morning meeting are transformative. And that is such a special and magical way to start the school day. And again, it's really systematic, but it changes everything. And that prioritizes that time. So the parent's not coming to you and saying, I'm sure they told you about this. And you say, oh no, I think they tried. And another student was crying and this was happening. And I didn't follow back up with that. This is really carving out that special time. And it's something everyone, teacher included, looks forward to. Something else that I do. So when I moved to Nashville, I was in my late 20s, and when you're in college, it's so easy to meet people and connect. It is not so easy when you kind of move to that next stage of life. And so I would often find myself in situations of like, gosh, I really love that person. I think we would really be friends. How do we move to that next level? Like I see them at this certain event once a week or once a month or whatever, or I run into them every so often. And every time I do, I love them so much. What do I do with that? How do I get to that next level of friendship? Because it's easier when you're in college. It's like, well, let's go study and we'll all set up camp together and kind of work through our homework or whatever.
Well, in everything I study too, it's like there's so much on family communication and how like romantic relationships build. And there is so little research on friendships.
Yes.
And it's like they're such an important relationship in our lives.
Gosh, they are.
How do we not know more about how they build, how they form, what those bonds mean to us?
Wow. Yeah, that's wild to think about. That's crazy. I started this in my personal life and then it split over into my professional life. But when I moved to Nashville, it was like, okay, how am I going to, connect and build more than the, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. And I was just really seeking deeper connection. Something about me at that time was that I found it challenging to go deep with people that I didn't know super, super well. And not that everyone has to. Some people I think kind of sit a little bit lighter and others kind of tend to gravitate towards things that are a little bit heavier. And I would find myself somewhere in the middle. Like I kind of go either way. But it was hard for me to move to depth because with someone new, if you're like sitting and grabbing coffee, which I think is such a popular way, like, hey, we don't know each other, well, let's grab coffee. But you are making like such intense eye contact the entire time. And it does tend to like get real deep, like really quick. And for me, I never know my out. I once bonded over a teacher best friend, but like we never know our out. We never know when it's like time to wrap it up. And so walking became, I was doing this kind of health and fitness challenge. I was turning 30 a few months later, and I really wanted to hit 30 at like the best shape of my life, like physically and mentally and emotionally. And I also realized that for me, like social connection was so much like going out to eat, spending lots of money, kind of all the, all of a sudden I've hung out with 5 friends this week, but I've eaten out 5 meals, and that's like hard to come back from, And so walking became this way of like, hey, that's still helping me achieve my fitness goals. It's free. You don't have to make that direct, intense eye contact the whole time. So I find myself naturally going deeper because we're walking, we're boosting these endorphins. Like I'm feeling so happy. Oh, yeah, I don't mind sharing that hard thing. It doesn't feel as hard when I'm like walking and moving and not like staring into your soul. And then also like it's free and healthy. So like, this is great, And so what I started doing was just asking people like, would you want to go on a walk? The other benefit, it has like a specified start and end. So again, instead of coffee, of like, we don't know each other that well. Is 45 minutes, 3 hours? Like where are we in there? But it's like, hey, you do your little loop and then, it's okay. That was great. We'll do that again sometime. And so what I found was no one said no. Like no one was like, no, I don't. No, thanks. I'm not going to go on a walk with you. I mean, everyone was like, well, yeah, sure. Like that's quick. That's easy. But yeah, so, like it's fresh air. It's easy. It's low.
Yep.
And so, of course, being a teacher, I can't just leave a walk. I started making them themed walks. So they all have these really fun questions. And a big thing in education right now is like gamifying where we can. So like making games out of things. And again, adults love all of this stuff too. And so I started coming up with all these games for my walk. And so like you would pick a game and you didn't like the title would be very ambiguous. So it was kind of like leaving it up to fate. So it was like pick a number and I would have this list of numbered questions. And so I'd say like pick 3 numbers. And so they would, and those were their 3 questions for the walk or whatever.
Cool.
Yeah. And so, it was something like that. But then I also would do like name name that tune and lines and songs that stuck out to me, I would like pull that and that would be the question. So, like there's one, like, I love country music. I'm Nashville. But one of them is, it's about like, till you can't, and till you can't, like, what is that one thing that you can do it until you can't? And all of a sudden, like, you can't ever go back and change that. Like, you've made this definitive choice, or that person is no longer part of your life, or, what are these things that you can go back and do until you can't? And so like, think of one of the, all of a sudden we're going on these like profound walks, but it feels really fun and really engaging and really deep. My favorite one that's been such a hit, I'm such a 90s kid, but I did a 90s 3-2-1. So like 3 things that you loved about the 90s, 2 things you miss about being a kid, and then 1 was like the name of your childhood best friend, and so like that's a really fun one. So all these fun different walking ideas. Well, again, I decided that would be such a good way to connect with my students during recess. And so I had like a calendar, and so it was super optional. But if you want to sign up and you want to connect with me and you want some time with me, we can sign up for just like 10 minutes of your recess. Like, I'll just come grab you and we can go on like a little loop around the playground and chat. And it can be either or, like either I can bring a fun question or game that we can chat about, or if you got something you just like are, wanting to share with me, that's a perfect time for it. And that calendar stayed full. I mean, and it's so funny because I still to this day, like I have a kid I didn't even know, her family, like her grandparents or whatever, have a house in New York on some body of water, and they go there every summer for the entire summer, and all the cousins come there. And like, I still think about that every summer of like how magical that her whole childhood, like all the cousins and all the family gets together at grandma and grandpa's house, and like they all like live and work out of it and play, and it's on water.
And, and you got to hear about it.
Right. And like, I still think about that all these years later, like what a cool experience. That's going to impact her forever, that will be like her summers of childhood. And, so it just things like that, just ways that they feel really connected. And then I was also this is kind of the last one that's coming to mind, but how can we like involve parents and invite them more into this community? Because again, I've got their most prized, their whole world is with me like every minute of every day. And how can I, kind of brag about them? And so I kind of wanted to flip the script. A lot of times a phone call home from school is not a good thing. It's either the nurse that they're sick, or they've gotten in trouble and you're not going to believe what they did. And, I got to tell you. And so how can we flip that script? Because again, we have such a positive relationship between parents and schools. And so what if a phone call home was a really good thing? And what if not only was it a really good thing, what if the whole class was involved? And what if the parent is on speakerphone with the whole class and we're bragging about the kid? So I called them sunshine phone calls. And so the kids helped me write like a little script. It was real quick, and I'd put the kid on speakerphone and the whole class would be on speakerphone, and we'd share this little, this is a sunshine phone call from Miss Higgs class. And I'd say the name of the student. They were a wonderful worker. And then I would just brag and say, hey, we're calling, we call it that. We hope it'll brighten your day. That's why we call it a sunshine phone call. But, they've been doing this and this and this. And you don't get to know that as a parent. I wanted you to hear just what an amazing job they're doing, and then the class would say, we hope this brightens your day or whatever. And so it was really quick. Like, I'm talking less than 3 minutes, but sometimes these are the things that matter the most. Lo and behold, if that is not still to this day, the thing I hear about the most from parents and students that I used to have, if I run into them, if I see them, do you remember that sunshine phone call? Like the parents still bring it up. The kids still bring it up. I still get messages and emails about it. So, so that's such a tiny bite-sized amount of time, but how impactful and how much does that make us feel, not only as a community within ourselves, but inviting parents and family into that community. And, like I said, kind of flipping that script on a phone call home, that it's a really positive experience. So I think that just goes back to what we talked about earlier, just celebrating successes. If I brag to the kid and say, hey, you did this great thing. Well, that may or may not, kind of get all the way home by the end of a school day, but how powerful is it to bring and invite the parents in who are going to be so proud to hear that their kid has done something, special and remarkable. So I think those are just a few of the ways that I really try to cultivate that culture of community and prioritize relationships here at school.
I love how intentional all of those things seem to be based on, where they came from for you and what they mean to you, even though, just in talking about them, it's like, okay, a walk or however long meeting in the morning or a phone call seem like really small things that are actually really big things. And it's cool because one of the other questions I was going to ask you is, what kinds of things are you doing in your work that you've seen actually apply to other areas of your life? And it seems like the answer is everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just so much transfer. I mean, they're just tiny humans. And so, I think, again, I'm constantly being refined and learning to be more
Mhm.
gracious because I can always flip that script of, wow, they forgot this. And that does feel a little frustrating in the moment because I did try to remind them and I communicated it ahead
Mm.
of time and they really need that to be successful today. But also, has there been a day this year that I left my laptop at home? And that's, kind of essential to every minute of my school day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And so, like, did anybody give me a really hard time? And was my principal really like passive aggressive? No, she was so
Mm.
gracious of, hey, here's 3 ideas. Like, we could do this. We could try this. What about this? We worked it out so easily. And I appreciated that grace. I'm hard enough on myself and I have really high
Yeah.
expectations. So I think just no matter what the situation is, we can always say, but on the other side, like, what does this look like as an adult? How did an adult handle me when I was forgetful and I forgot something important? Did they kind of feel frustrated and grouchy about that? Or did they offer me some grace, problem solve, and move on? And never thought about it again, but it was really impactful for me that it was handled with such grace. And so trying to kind of mirror that with my students as well, the way I appreciate being treated and handled as an adult.
Yeah. I think the big idea is what changes in our world when we look at communication instead of through it, as if it's this kind of abstract thing that doesn't really matter when it does.
Yeah.
Because what was communicated to you about, okay, you forgot your laptop or, whatever the example is, it could be communicated with grace or with a million other things. And that's going to change that interaction so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about, if you are thinking about your classroom and all the things that you do with your students and the process you go through to go about doing the differentiation and educating the educators on Instagram or in your own school, if you have your communication glasses on, what's the communication that happens there? What do you see?
I think the thing that I'm still working on the most is, which is funny because I've talked for such a long time, but over communicating, because I think sometimes there's, assumptions are made of, oh yeah, I think they'll remember that, or, oh, what, but like, I think that we all are just like fielding so many inputs all day long from, our email and our text and our social media and the kids and the family and the, all of these things that like over communicating, especially in my field, is really helpful. And then a phrase that I feel like has caught on the last year or two, but like clarity is kindness. And so as clear as you can possibly be is kind. And for me, that's great if things are positive. But what about when I'm having to share something that is a little bit more challenging of like, hey, this is how I'm feeling about this, or, in the dating world of, they talk about like ghosting and things like that. Like clarity is kindness. And so I'm challenging myself, to be more clear, whether that is in, dating and relationships, whether that is in a professional setting, whether that's in a personal setting, but just being as clear with my communication as I can, rather than just, because I think ghosting, I actually had a whole dinner about this one time and it started, a married couple brought it up, but they were actually talking about how often ghosting happens in the workplace and kind of in some real estate where you would have a deal that you thought was just days from, kind of moving forward and closing. And then someone just ghosts and like, you don't hear from that. And so I think, it maybe kind of originated possibly in kind of this dating world, but it's kind of moved to everything. And so I think that's because we over time maybe can be challenged by having hard conversations. So we do just kind of ghost, whether that's in I decided I didn't want to go through with that business deal. So I think I'm just going to kind of leave that one hanging, or I'm just not going to respond to that email that was tricky, or, in personal life, whatever that looks like. And so trying to navigate what that looks like to communicate clearly and that is kind. And so even though it doesn't feel kind, because maybe it's hey, I don't want to move forward with that business deal, or hey, this conversation left me feeling kind of this way and I felt like maybe you needed to know that, like those are hard. And for me, I do tend to want to just avoid them and keep it real sunny and real happy and real positive, but
that feels easier to do.
It does feel easier. And so, but it also in my brain, I know that seems like such reverse logic, but that felt kinder of like, well, wouldn't you rather me just disappear than tell you that I don't want to pursue, the business deal that we had going or this other thing? And so this whole dinner was about that. And it was like, no, that's never the kindest option. And so that's really been a challenge in my life the last few years, is like, never leaving someone on read, never not responding to a message or an email, even assuming like, hey, I told you I'd come over at 6:30. So yeah, it's 6:29 and I'm leaving my apartment, but like, I don't need to communicate that with you. No, that's fine. Like, hey, you've got 10 extra minutes. I am terribly sorry I'm running late, but that, you've got 10 extra minutes rather than thinking I'm about to walk in your door. And, so just being clear, over communicating when it feels like that's not natural to me. I said I get there 6:30. I'm heading in that direction. No, that's 10 extra minutes. You can, finish the laundry you've been putting off or, whatever.
Yeah, it sounds like the clarity is kind. And then also I would say like respectful of other people, especially like other people's time, if you're using that example.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of want to use this to transition into my last questions, which is we're always working toward better social worlds
Sure.
for ourselves and creating those through our communication. But, how people define a better social world is different for everyone.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share what a better social world looks like to you.
I think the first thought, and this is probably a common response, but I think technology and kind of, phone down, face up a little bit more. I didn't even know, my friend who's all about beauty, like apparently we're getting this thing called like tech neck. And it's because we literally spend so long like bent over looking at our phone that there is like a new wrinkle that people have that is actually very clearly defined. Like after she said that, I went home and looked in the mirror. I was like, do I have tech neck? Like, what is that? But like face up, phone down, like just that I'm more engaged. I have this this is so silly. I've done it for years, but one time my friend was at dinner and I kept being like, could you like put your phone away? Like I'm not going to pay $25 for the meal to watch you on your phone. And she responded and said, I'm not on my phone, as she's like on her phone and texting. And so I made up the silliest little song in the moment. And I was like, no phones at dinner, no phones at dinner, no phones at dinner. And so now she sings that with her whole family. And it's, but it's like, if we're paying to go out and have this experience and we're eating a nice meal, like I didn't like kind of carve out this time for you to watch you play on your phone or watch you respond to 10 text messages. And so I think that's like when, again, that song is so silly, but just, like no phones at dinner. Like there's times that we carve out to just be present and to be engaged. And we're looking at everyone else's highlight reel anyway, rather than living our own sometimes. And, I think that's just really important. I think, and it's funny, I think this kind of brings it full circle, but at the beginning I was kind of alluding to, I think during COVID, we all made ourselves a lot of promises. I think during the quarantine, especially, it was like, wow, when my life went from 200 miles an hour to 0, almost overnight. It felt like it happened so quickly when we went into full quarantine mode. I think we all made ourselves a lot of promises about how things would look different and what lessons we would take from this slowdown and from this recharge and this reset. And, wow, I'm having time to exercise every day for the first time in a long time. And I feel so good. I've got to keep that. Like that has to be a priority. Or, just these different things that we did of, silly things like we would make time, in creative ways to connect with people. If we couldn't do that face to face, what were these other ways that we could stay connected? The drive-by parades were invented and like all these great things. But I don't know, maybe it is just me, but it feels like I made myself a lot of promises and then the world picked right back up slowly. Like it went, 200 to 0, but then it went 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. And so it happened so slowly. I don't think I've even been fully cognizant of how I'm right back where I was, if not 10 times more so, trying to like make up for the lost time, And so I think if it had gone 0 back to 200, I would have said, whoa, like I can't even handle this much input anymore. Like I've been, working at, this new capacity, but because it happened so slowly, I think I didn't even notice that I found myself going back to so many old rhythms and habits. So I think for me, that also a better social world looks like setting healthy boundaries so that I, whether, I don't know, the idea of kind of like saying your best yes and saying no a little bit more often, because I think, again, I'm kind of 200 to 0 and maybe now I'm at 250, 300 miles per hour. I can't give everybody the best. And so whether that's, when I am with somebody, I am so tired that like I can't fully engage in that conversation because I've said yes to everything and I'm so depleted, whether that's I'm saying yes to you, but I've got these other things going on my phone. So I'm checking this text and, I got to send this quick work thing. I'm sorry, I got to do it. Like, so I think just establishing healthier boundaries of like, what time do I check work email outside of work? What does that look like? And when do I say, no, I'm engaging with friends and, with family, and this is personal, that's professional. And this is a clear, healthy boundary there. I think it has a spillover effect. Like that makes me better everywhere. When I set healthier boundaries, I'm a better person in my personal life, and that makes me a better person in my professional life. So yeah, I think some of that, those are just a few of the kind of better social worlds is kind of prioritizing where technology fits into that. It's the biggest blessing and the biggest curse. Like I think it's completely changed everything in the best possible ways, but it has brought new challenges.
No, I agree. I think that's a huge part of it is figuring out a healthier relationship to technology because it can take away from so much of the presence that
Yeah.
means so much. Like it's one of those small things that's actually big.
Yeah.
Of if you are getting on your phone to scroll for 1 minute while I'm telling a story, it seems like a small thing, but it's actually a big thing, especially over a lifetime of a relationship.
Yeah.
That you're going to miss out on all those little moments of connection, which are the big moments.
I know you're a fellow Pinterest quote loving girl, but like one that really has stuck with me is stop glorifying busy. And I think that feels like such a challenge to me of like, why do I find meaning in that? Does that make me feel cool? Does it make me feel valuable? Like, why do I think busy is like a positive? And like, at what point I am a busy person. Like I am most energized when I'm with people and kind of out and about in the world. But where is that line between like me flourishing and thriving and just glorifying like busy for busy's sake? And, you know, like, again, that's not my best yes when I'm just saying yes to everything. And, you know, I go home from school and I have 4 back-to-back events at night. I'm like haggard at all of them. I'm late to all of them. I'm halfway, you know, like kind of distracted, kind of late, and also thinking about where I need to get next and my mental mapping, how I can make up this time, you know. But yeah, I found myself really like convicted by that. I'm like, I do really glorify busy. And I think this fast-paced world that we live in, that technology like adds so much to how much quicker we can do everything. It is easy to glorify busy, and for like at what cost and at what point am I like actually moving forward and being really productive and putting more out into the world versus what point am I so depleted, I've exhausted all resource, I'm not giving anybody or anything my best. So yeah, stop glorifying busy.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. Rest does not come naturally to me. And it's because there's this layer of busy, and then there's maybe even deeper layer of like our whole culture around productivity and being like, that's your value right there. What are you contributing? And how dare you take a moment for yourself to rest because you're not producing anything. Right. When in reality, the resting, the saying no, the taking time to yourself is so important to be able to give your best yes.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I feel like you're talking about me when you're talking. Like, is she talking about her or is she talking about me? Might as well be. Okay, so my last question is using some of the language around the podcast that I've been using is to talk about our whole life in terms of turns. And you could say that in like a very small context in terms of a conversation that we just had. It was turns back and forth. I said one thing, so you responded this way, so I responded that way, and it's all turns. And then on a larger scale, you could see your life as a turn in this direction. And so because of that, then you turn this direction. Yeah. So that's just a little context for why I use this language. But I'm wondering what we could come up with as a next turn for people listening to this podcast of like, where do we go from here? Having been a part of this conversation.
Well, again, I think that segue is perfect. So I think the idea of kind of stop glorifying busy, for me, that's kind of like maybe the direction that I would say. And I guess maybe like action steps, how do I go about that, would be like slowing down. You mentioned the word intentionality earlier. And while I have these like key pieces that are really intentional, I'm sharing those examples of intentionality. But on the other hand, you know, I'm just giving you that example of I have 4 things in a row and I'm late to all of them because the first one got off track. So that's going to put me off because I was way overbooked and overprogrammed. And so I think less of that, like less over-programming, being more intentional, not just in like these bite-sized chunks of, this one piece of what I do is really intentional or really caring and loving others well. But then does that like offset or compensate the fact that I just blew through 4 events? I was late to all of them. I was halfway engaged. I was, not my full self, kind of scattered. What does that look like? So I think that's kind of, I would say, the stop glorifying being so busy, slow down, be more intentional with where I am when I'm there. Less over programming, and kind of like I was saying that, that best yes, like where can I put my best yes so that that's where I'm going to invest. That's where I'm going to be more intentional. And I think that is easier said than done. Like this is, if we were to check in a month and you said, hey, how's that going? Like, I don't know. I think this for me is going to be something I will have to be really intentional about probably for my whole life. Like, just like you were just saying, like, I don't think I'm programmed to rest well and to rest really easily anymore. And I think the older I get, I feel like the faster life is just moving, moving, moving. And I find more things to get involved in. I've met more people. So those are more people that I want to like reconnect with. Hey, it's been a couple months. We need to check in. Like, you know, and that it's a good snowball effect. Like there's all these wonderful, big, huge, full, glorious things in my life, but I'm not giving my best to any of them when I try to do all of them. So being more intentional and thoughtful. And then when I do connect with them and I do make time for this event, really being present instead of, gosh, I don't even feel like they got the best version of me. Like that wasn't it. So
we can work towards better social worlds without running ourselves into the ground trying to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because better doesn't mean fuller. Like I don't think it has to be better social world. It means that I'm super social all the time. It means that if I'm very intentional when I plan it and when I have that time and I'm thoughtful in that and I'm present in that, that to me has a lot more effect than kind of dazzling in and out of all these places and not being able to give them very much.
I think that's a great thing to end on for our conversation.
Yay. I have enjoyed this so much. Your questions have inspired me to go back, think about some questions for my future walks and different ways that I kind of work on intentionality with my people.
That means a lot. That's a big compliment to me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for just inviting me to join and share. And I think, again, that leaves me feeling really valued and heard and had opportunities to share pieces of my story and just feel like I'm so invested. And so I'm just really grateful for the opportunity.
I liked being the story hearer today. It's good.
Well, shocking, but I love being the story sharer.
Yeah, no
really
problems
hard
there.
For me to dig so deep and talk for such a long time, but I found the words. So.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Stephanie. At the end of each episode, I like to offer some questions to reflect on, which act as a next turn for us. So the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. The questions I would have you think about today are, this first one's a long one, but I think it's a great question. How can we celebrate our own individuality and the individuality of others by being honest about our needs, finding unique ways to meet them, and saying out loud the things we appreciate about each other? Next question is, how can we celebrate children's individuality in school settings and beyond? What happens when we learn not only how to tell our own story, but to hear the stories of others as well? And finally, what does it look like to set boundaries that allow us to say our best yes? You're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections to those questions. Great places to do that are emailing me. You can also contact me through the Stories Lived, Stories Told website. You're welcome to comment on Instagram and YouTube. And I'll also point you toward the CMM Institute Substack. That's a great place to engage in dialogue as well. Links to all those places are in the show notes below. And the reason I invite you to share your reflections with me is to stay in dialogue, of course. And other great ways to keep the dialogue going is to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, and share this episode or any episode that's been meaningful for you with someone you would like to invite into the conversation. I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to move us toward better social worlds through better communication. I mentioned at the top of the episode one of those other initiatives, which is Cosmo Activities, and those are social emotional resources which are available for free at www.cosmoactivities.com. I also mentioned Cosmo Parents, which will be the newest edition beginning in January of 2025. But if you're a parent, if you're interested in that, you can head over to that same Cosmo Activities website, click on the Cosmo Parenting page, and subscribe to our Substack, which again will be getting started in January 2025. So you'll want to be a subscriber by then so you don't miss anything. We're really excited about that. And Stephanie has been collaborating with me on that. So there's a lot of good wisdom in there. Like I said, I'll include all the links below so you can learn more about everything the CMM Institute is doing in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.